There you go.
Okay, and we're live. Welcome to the Facsimile to Cup Along. I am your host, Ryan Brown, the author of Dear Coffee Buyer. I think the first and only book about the role of professional green coffee purchasing and procurement. And you are, if I want to make sure you're in the right place, you are in Facsimile. Facsimile is a coffee tasting for serious enthusiasts. Every month we send you 4, not 5, never 5, 4 samples to that are carefully selected, skillfully roasted, and ready for you to evaluate along with us live right now. The idea is that you can improve your coffee tasting skills, calibrate scores with experts, and gain insights about origins, processing, and samples. If you're a subscriber, I hope you have your Facsimile coffees in front of you. If you are not a subscriber and you're just lurking, welcome. We're really excited to have you. You're in for a treat today. You will learn a lot about cupping and about Q certification and about the coffees in front of us. You will get so much more out of this experience if you're also cupping the coffees along with us. So I would encourage you to follow the trail of links below this movie picture right here and go and subscribe so you can cup with us next time. The idea of Facsimile is to allow you to taste the same roast of the same coffee along with us. You can learn a lot about coffee from reading books, watching videos, reading articles, reading even cupping protocols, if that's your thing. You will not become a better cupper by doing any of those things. Really the only way to become a cupper is to cup with other professionals who have more different other experience than yourself, which leads me to our guest today. I'm really excited to have Gabby Wright Deserre in our virtual cupping lab. Hello, Gabby.
Hello.
Gabby is a trader and the Ecuador sales lead at Red Fox Coffee Merchants in beautiful Berkeley, California, where she is right now today with us. She is Q certified in processing and grading. She has 10 years of experience in coffee and a degree in Latin American studies. Gabby, you've lived in Colombia, Ecuador, Mexico, Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. You currently reside in Seattle, not nearly as beautiful as Berkeley, but beautiful enough that I'm moving there soon to the Pacific Northwest, not to Seattle. I'm moving in, Gabby. Gabby, it's so nice to have you here with us today.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for having me.
I can't wait to cup these samples with you.
Let's do it.
Did I miss any important countries that you previously lived in?
Not that I've lived in, just that I've
What's the next country you're going to live in?
Oh, I would have to probably talk to my husband about that one.
Okay.
I shouldn't make that claim.
You don't want to broadcast that here first?
Not yet.
So after the last cupping, we asked for your feedback, and we got a ton of really great, helpful feedback. Probably the most popular request was to do something more interactive while you're cupping along live with us. While it would be detrimental to your experience if Gabby and I were interrupted during cupping to answer any questions you have, Scott Rayo himself is trolling the YouTube live chat in this video. And so I would encourage you, he'll probably say hi the way that he says hi. I would encourage you to pepper him with any questions, comments that you have while we're cupping. Scott will join the call after we evaluate these samples, and hopefully we'll get an opportunity to answer most, if not all, of the questions that come up. So, Gabby, are you ready to cup these?
Let's do it.
Okay, I've been warming water. Are you warming water also?
I have hot water.
Perfect. Okay. I have not ground my samples. Have you ground yours?
I have not.
Okay. And I will actually just briefly inventory this because I worry that I forget something if I don't. So I have coffees 1, 2, 3, and 4 set up here. I have 10 grams of coffee in each one because I'm going to pour 170 grams of water after we grind them. I have 2 rinse bowls, 2 spoons, a timer, a spittoon that doesn't at all resemble my cupping bowl because otherwise I'll accidentally drink spit. I have a grinder, I have a kettle with hot water, and I also have a piece of paper and a pencil to take some notes on. And I think that's good. I think we're good. Should we grind?
I actually am missing something. You reminded me.
Perfect. You don't need a timer. I can keep time for you.
No, I just need something to rinse some spoons. Thank you.
This is what I do. Oh, and I also have a bucket off screen, or do I? I don't know. Maybe I'm just pouring the water on the ground when I do that. Let's go ahead and grind right now.
Cool.
Okay, so one thing, it would be extremely uncommon if you showed up at a cupping and started openly, loudly, and articulately describing what it is that you are smelling and fragrance and aroma and what you're tasting. We're gonna break that rule. That's the whole point of why we're here. So Gabby, I noticed that you've got a little bit of a head start because you're probably using a proper grinder over there. Please feel free, starting with number 1, and just let us know what it is that you're smelling in these as you're proceeding.
Yeah, let's do it. I haven't started doing that yet. So when I'm, especially days like today where I've just like jumped in, haven't really had any coffee yet, I tend not to always go really specific with fragrances because I'm not a strong nose person. So the thing that comes to me is like brown notes. And I'm thinking
Yeah.
like brown butter or like nougat. And but brown is like the note that pops into my head for this first one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you ever use
Uh,
colors when?
oh, absolutely. Oh, for sure, 100%. I use a lot of shorthand in my cupping notes. Brown for me can often mean specifically brown sugar, but I will say I'm an hour ahead of you. I've had my coffee. I am probably more of a nose person than a tongue person. And I also think that this first sample is kind of buttery and caramel.
Great. So my nose is awake.
You're good. I hope not. I hope your nose is not sentient. What about 2?
Let's see. Yeah, definitely more like fruit, floral, maybe some like grape juice in there. Maybe milk chocolate. It's this one, there's a lot going on in this cup. It's beautiful already.
Yeah, absolutely. Something like a sugar cane or kind of like a less browned, but a more intense kind of fresh sugar cane. Yeah, I'm getting some sweet citrus. What about 3?
A little bit more citric. So I think I'm getting like lime. It's not, fragrance isn't quite as strong as number 2, but there's yeah, something. I think I'm like getting lime and some light florals on that one.
Yeah, 3 for me is there's some definitely more intense brown sugar, a little bit of floral, also sweet toast.
That's a good note. Sweet.
What about 4? No, don't steal my notes. Don't steal my notes.
Oh, right.
What about 4?
Oh. I think I know what this is. I'm getting like a sweet like cherry tomato fragrance.
Ooh. Yeah. For me, 4 is when I smell that, it often is like sweet cherry or a cooked berry, something that you might find in like a stewed or even a berry pie kind of thing.
Definitely.
Perfect. I think we should go ahead and pour.
Are you gonna keep time?
I am gonna keep time. Oh. And so I have 10 grams of coffee in each of these. So I'm going to pour 170 grams of water. I'm starting the timer now, pouring now. So one thing that everyone should know, Gabby, is that you have a connection with, you have a strong connection with one of the coffees on this table, and you have a looser connection with 2 of the other coffees on this table, but you don't actually know what's what.
That is true.
And one of these coffees you have nothing to do with. I mean, other than that, you're a coffee professional and it's a coffee. So that's an element of this that I am looking forward to. Last month when I cupped with Scott, he and I knew those coffees quite well. And something I'm looking forward to is you not really knowing what's on this table, or at least where on the table it is. I'm going to go ahead and smell these now. Gabby, feel free to mention anything that you're smelling and just let us know what number it is.
Oh, great. Yeah. So the first one, I just like that brown butter fragrance just intensified for me. But on the second cup, the floral notes really popped more than they did on the dry fragrance. This third one, I love it.
The third one is the one that got the honeyed florals that I smelled in the fragrance just really have been intensifying. And I have been cupping these for the past several days. And what's interesting about this is that as it matures a little bit, let's say, that sweet floral intensity in the aroma has just gotten stronger and stronger.
Yeah.
And do you typically evaluate between the fragrance and the break, or do you just skip to the break?
Well, to be completely honest, most of the time I have so many coffees, I don't really have enough time to pour between the 4-minute mark and the time to break.
Oh boy, yeah. How many coffees are you typically cupping at once?
These days with COVID, I would say it's between like 6 and 8, but I like to do 2 bowls. So it's a little bit more pouring than what we did today.
Yeah. We have like 40 seconds until we need to break. Can we briefly see your setup today?
Yeah. So I am just 4 bowls here.
Got it.
I'm using an EK. And yeah.
Nice.
Just simple.
Yeah, perfect. And so you'll typically do 2 bowls when you're cupping in at home.
Yes.
Yeah.
Looking for consistency in the coffees.
Absolutely. Okay, so we can go ahead and break these. And Gabby, please feel free to just tell us what you're smelling as you go through them.
So far, it's a lot of the same notes on cup 1 and 2.
Okay. Yeah, it really smells like a chocolate caramel candy to me right now.
Yes. Caramel was my last note I put down for it. The cup number 3 and 4, I just am finding the aroma to keep intensifying. That 4th cup is really getting a lot of those like berries and like maybe dark stone fruit notes.
3 is an interesting mix between strong fruit and floral, but also it has this underlying base of butter and caramel as well.
Like a wild honey.
4 has some nice herbal notes. I'm getting hibiscus. It's also starting to get a little bit more honeyed. Great. So let's go ahead and clean these off. Gabby, I'd love to hear more about how you approach your role, how do you approach cupping in your role as a salesperson?
Yeah, so as far as the sales side of my job, I like to cup coffee, anything that's like on our spot menu or coming in that we've purchased, to kind of get like the gist of it, if you will. So I'm not looking for really specific notes, but more the general notes, like what are the big notes that really pop out at me? So for example, on this table today already, I'd be like, oh, this one has like more of like a brown butter, caramel thing going on, whereas cup number 4 has more of those like big fruit notes and just not that berry thing going on. So when somebody approaches me and says, I'm looking to buy some coffee from Red Fox, do you have anything that's going to be like on the more caramely side? I can point them in the direction of cup 1 versus cup 4. So I'm never trying to have the exact notes, but I think most of the time people are, if they're looking for like a single origin, I'll tend to point them in the direction of something of cup that has a lot more complexity versus something that I think would be really good for a blend component. And so really trying to like get the general idea of each coffee. So when somebody approaches, I can easily lead them down a path that they'll have a couple options, but all of those options should be pretty good to fit their needs.
Yeah, absolutely. And something that's been really interesting to a curiosity for a lot of our audience is score sheets and scoring. What do you use to take notes when you're cupping?
Yeah, so I just do paper and pen and pencil. I do pencils so I can erase stuff because that happens a lot. But I have like a permanent CQI scoring sheet in my head. So a lot of the time I run through it and I'll be like, how's the sweetness? How's the acidity on this? Is it clean? And it kind of, I think you're in the same boat where at one point you can cup a coffee and you're like, I know this is an 86, but when I can go back through my CQI cupping sheet in my head and be like, all right, box number 2 was definitely an 8. Box number 3 was an 8 because I know this was like a really good, solid sweetness. This is really good, solid acidity. It's not too sparkly. It's not too dull. And so I kind of, I'm a visual learner. So I just constantly refer back to my internal sheet, but everything is just paper and pencil as far as my
Yeah. And when you use just paper and pencil, and we're definitely good. I'm looking forward now to seeing that visual CQI sheet when we get into these. So you're on the lam for that. What are your notes that you typically take? What kinds of notes?
So right now I just did, you can even see, I put, this would be fragrance and this next line is aroma. So I can see how it's changing. And then I'll mark it. I just put an A, I put an F, and then I'll mark it for, I'll put an N for notes. And then that's my notes for the actual coffee, and any observations I may take is under that. So it's just those 3 things I'm trying to record. Sometimes I don't do aroma and fragrance. I just go straight into notes. Kind of depends.
So if I'm understanding you right, it's typically kind of like fragrance, aroma, maybe some other notes, and then a score.
Yes, and score. Thank you. Get that.
Got it. And so when you're saying that when you cup, you'll typically break it down by quality. And do you put any difference of weight on? I mean, there's of the qualities, the typical score sheets have them equally divvied up. Is that how you approach cupping, or do you feel like certain qualities or maybe even issues are more prominent or important to you?
I'm not sure exactly what you're asking.
Yeah.
Could you rephrase that?
Of course. What qualities or maybe issues are more important to you when cupping?
Oh, right. So especially when, like for the sales side of things, for issues where I'm always looking for if there's any defects that have developed. We do a lot of cupping before we purchase coffee. So most of the time we won't see any of the big ones like potato or like ferment or phenol, but sometimes it does happen. And the other thing is fade, which can happen if our coffee's been sitting in the warehouse for too long. So that's always something I'm cupping for, is to see how the coffee's aging. Just so I can communicate that with whatever roaster I'm talking to. And then, as far as quality goes, it's just like, how is this coffee holding up? Is when we first started cupping it, when we first purchased it, how is those like just my notes and score and how is that changing? How quickly is that changing? Those are all pretty important to me.
And you told us a little bit, but I'd love to hear more. How do you set up your cupping table? Is it always the same? It sounds like sometimes it's bigger, sometimes it's smaller, depending on maybe where it is. If it's, something you're looking at, maybe purchasing, looking at something that's arriving. How do you set up your cupping table?
Yeah, so we do two different types of cuppings here at Red Fox that I get to be part of. So one is signal detection, and that's what we use for offers. And it's a double blind process where we put 3 cups randomly throughout the table. So for example, there may be 20 cups on the table, but coffee A would be in position 1, 10, and 20, but we don't know that. So we go through and we give them pretty basic scores. It's 1 through 6. 1 is bad, 6 is good. And we kind of rate it. And usually we're looking for like the terroir of whatever region we're cupping for. And that way we can evaluate and see if cup 1, 10, and 20 were consistent. And if all of them scored 6, then that's most likely definitely something we're buying. If all of them score 1, we're not. Whereas when I'm cupping, when coffee's already been purchased, we'll do anything between 2 and 3 bowls, looking for consistency in the coffee, looking for those actual notes and scores. When we're doing offers, we're not really looking for scores and those notes. We're just looking at how is this coffee tasting right now? Is there any defects? Is there anything that nobody wants to have in their roaster one day or in their cup of coffee?
Yeah, that's great. The signal detection is something that your colleague Joel shared with me a few years back and has really changed the way that I approach a lot of my cupping. I use different colored stickers, and actually, I'll grind them all and I'll let you put stickers underneath the bowl, and then I'll randomly move them around. And by the time I'm done, I have no idea where they are. And it's just completely changed the way that I understand consistency, but also it helps me because I found that when I was cupping several bowls at once, if I'm focused on consistency, then I would do great. But if I was focused on what is the score of this coffee, then I would just kind of be racing through the second, third, fourth, fifth bowl in some cases.
Absolutely. The other thing we found, or at least I found, is when I cup a lot of coffee, which a lot being a single sample, sorry, I should clarify. And it has, it's beautiful. I'm scoring at 89. It has all the complexity in the world. And I go to the coffee next to it. Sometimes that next coffee just doesn't look as good or taste as good, even though it is an 86, 87, and it has there's nothing wrong with it, but I just came from an 89 and now I'm going to an 86. And so maybe I score it lower. So the thing with signal detection, which has been cool, is it's so randomized that you may have a coffee that's absolutely phenomenal next to one that's not, next to 3 that's not, and then back to 4 that are phenomenal. And you kind of get to trick your brain into just looking at each coffee individually rather than having like a preconceived idea from the last one of how it should taste.
Oh, 100%. You just described something that actually occasionally makes me sleep poorly at night, which is, and I'm not even joking. It's a common thing where we try to make humans do a subjectively human thing in a non-human way. And it's, of course, we're going to fail at that. And so I've occasionally done a table, feel like I'm pretty good on my scores, and then I'll just, on a whim, cup the table backwards. And suddenly I feel differently about the coffees. Context is the whole point of cupping. And if context is the whole point of cupping, then how do we make sure that we're actually providing the most number of context for each individual sample? And unknowingly scattering the bowls around the table is certainly one way that we could achieve that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of psychology in coffee tasting that we don't talk about a lot. I know one of the big things I've experienced with buyers is when you are at origin cupping coffees, the coffees always taste better. And when you're back home, they're still good, but they just maybe don't taste as good. And that psychology, it's something that we need to keep in mind sometimes, I think, when we're really tearing into a coffee and be like, oh, this coffee, or we're like praising it so highly when they could potentially be really similar. And just like the context in which we've tasted them is different.
I'm surrounded by my coworkers now. Now I hate this coffee. Should we go ahead and cup these? We're at about 16 minutes, so they should be a great temperature. And as before, Gabby, please just tell us what you're tasting as you taste these.
So the first like two things that popped out at me on cup number one was like buttered toast. I know we got that in the fragrance, but I still taste that. But I also get this now herbal flavor that's coming through.
Yeah. Is that, would you describe it as a positive herbal quality or not?
I personally quite like it. I think this coffee doesn't, it's quite round for me. So there's no bright acidity. There's not bright sweetness on either side, but they kind of balance each other out. And that herbal just kind of sits in there with that balance. Yeah, I think it's positive. How about you?
What about two?
Couple things here. So I'm getting like, and again, this may be context from the last one I tasted, but I'm getting like a praline flavor. That's really, it's nice. And then there's like a grape, like a Concord grape. Some floral.
What's impressive to me about two is how structured the acidity is. Mm-hmm. It has some interesting, I think, citric tart kind of qualities. So orange and lime, even grapefruit, but just really well structured, not a lot distracting without losing complexity or nuance.
Yeah.
What about three?
The first note that jumps out at me is like a blackberry. Still getting that like honey sweetness. Oh. I think more of that, like maybe like a dark plum or some of those like darker berry notes and fruit notes.
Yeah. I taste something that is like a spiced apple cider. Does that ring a bell for you?
I can see it. It's not the strongest note for me, to be honest.
Yeah.
I can see like that baking spice note in there for sure. Spiced apple cider. Now that sounds good.
I have to say too, I haven't gotten to four yet, but of the three, I would say that number three is the most complex on this table. I get it from fragrance to now this first sip, just a wide range of, I would argue, well harmonizing, beautiful flavors.
I agree.
What about 4?
Sorry, I missed my spittoon. So I still get, I know what's happening. I know these 2 coffees. They just popped into my head. Sorry, that really excited me. Number 4, I'm getting like that sweet cherry tomato still. There's more stone fruit. Like I think I'm getting some apricot coming through.
Yeah. Exactly for this, the apricot in particular, just like really ripe, fresh, biting into a really nice fresh apricot.
Yeah, that's a pretty big note on that one. And it kind of has that like apricot sweetness to it.
If you've ever had a tangy orange juice, there's something about this that kind of has that tangy orange juice quality to it as well. Whatever the upscale version of high C is.
Yeah.
Gabby, would you feel comfortable scoring these?
Sure. Let me go through one more time. So for cup 1, I'd probably put it between like a 84, 85.
Okay.
If I'd probably settle on 85.
Would you be willing to kind of lay out the CQI map in your brain?
So both sweetnesses and acidity, it's not quite where I would want this coffee to be, but they are pretty well in balance with each other, I think. So I'd probably score them like a 7, both of those. The flavor itself, I want there to be more complexity. So that's something else where I'm just going to get it down a little bit there, probably back down to like a 7, but it's clean. Overall, like, pretty sure I know this coffee. There's nothing about this coffee that there's no defect. The notes are quite pleasant, I think. I wouldn't ding it for that herbal, even though that is a note that sometimes we can take as a positive or negative. So I think with like 7 + 7 + 7 coming out with clean cups, overall, I think it's okay. Probably would give it like a 7.5, 8. I think that's landing me around probably, 84 points.
I'm not keeping track. I bet Scott is keeping track right now, though. Scott will come on, and the first thing he'll tell us is whether or not your math was right.
It's not, because if you do 8 across the board, that's going to be 86. If I knock down 2, then now we're looking at 84.
I think I like it more than you like it.
Yeah? How are you feeling?
So I agree that the acidity it's not a particularly complex acidity. I think the sweetness and the balance are very nice. And I keep expecting it to fall apart as it cools, but it doesn't. Like it maintains and it holds up. And the consistency kind of the chocolatey, caramelly, buttery flavors from fragrance through the cool cup. And as I've had the experience of cupping this many times, as it cools, it starts to, I think you might find it starts to have some interesting grape-like fruit flavors that come through and is very complementary to the cup.
It was actually this last bit, I would say white wine is a
okay. So I would score this 86, 86.5 probably. What about, wait, should we reveal now or should we? Do you want to know what it is now? Because you think you know what it is, and so I'm really curious what you think it is.
I think this is mine.
No, it's not.
Really? Oh, thank God.
Yes. Let's move on. Let's move on.
Interesting.
What about 2? I shouldn't have told you. I don't know why I told you. Darn it.
Oh, I just got really excited. So this is my favorite game, by the way. So number 2. I really like that grape note that keeps jumping out at me. Has like that really nice sweetness, like you were saying, that grapefruit acidity it's not overwhelming, it's quite nice. I would probably score this like 87, 86.5, 87.
Okay. Yeah, that sweet citrus juice, like a lemonade or a limeade, just keeps growing. I'm at an 87, 87.5. So I'm a little bit higher than you again. What about 3?
If I may, I would probably say this is like an 89 for me. I love the complexity of this coffee. I love the sweetness of it. The blackberry type acidity that's going on in there. Just, I think the aftertaste, I'm getting florals. Like there's so much. I think it's beautiful. I would probably go 89 with this one, 89, 90.
So I have to tell you, this coffee, I often cup, especially without co-cuppers these days, in these days of COVID, I will cup a coffee over many days. This sample is probably often has been an 86.5, 87 when I cup it a day or 2 out of, like a day or 2 after I've received it. If I wait a few more days, it just seems to keep going up. And also as it cools, the score just seems to keep going up. Some coffees, as you cup them, like as they cool, something about the acidity, it's not complex or high quality acidity, and they'll fall apart. This coffee does the opposite. I agree. I would give this an 88.5. I think it's just a beautiful coffee. It's complex. It's an odd marriage of really nice sugar browning and those browner flavors that you talked about, those more base, sweet, but pleasant flavors. And then these interesting nuance and notes of blackberry and currant and fruit punch. It's very pleasant, very nice coffee. And what about 4?
So this is when I would go back and amend my score probably. But this one, as it's cooling, I think it has such that beautiful like apricot sweetness coming through. This one I would put back up there, like 89, 90. But so this is when I would go back and amend my score, and I'd probably put this back at 88.5, now tasting a 89 next to it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm at an 89 on this last one too. So it sounds like we have the same score on the last 2.
Yeah.
Great. Anything else that you want to say about what you're tasting here? Should we do what we said before and cup them backwards and see if they change?
Yeah, do it. Going backwards from 4 to 3, some of that acidity really pops a little bit more. At least for me, I feel like there's almost like a little bit of like a Meyer lemon acidity that just came out of nowhere.
Yeah. On which one?
On 3. after
three.
cupping.
Yeah. I adjusted one score. I adjusted one from an 86 down to an 85.5. So I'm closer to you now. Wonderful. So Gabby, you are certified in both Q grading and processing. What led you to pursue those certifications?
Why did I do it?
Yeah.
So the reason I got certified, Q certified in both of them really, is because I didn't feel like I was being respected in coffee. And I felt like if I had an opportunity to get this thing, then people would finally ask me to come to the cupping table, or ask for my notes. So prior to that, I found myself in a lot of situations where I was always the only female at the table. And I was always the youngest cupper, not just in age, but in time cupping, but age was definitely a part of it. And so I would be at the cupping table and I would have questions, but I wasn't ever really permitted to ask those questions because there was Q graders already cupping and they were seriously cupping coffees. And I would have these notes and I'm like, well, I really want to, is it right for me to say that this cup has white wine? Like, is that a real note? Can I use that? And so for a few years, even, I kind of kept my notes to myself and I would read other people's notes. And that's how I started learning. And I would calibrate to them, but I never got a share. And so it led me to want to just have some representation. And I think like now these days, I always invite people who don't have cupping experience. I'd like to invite women to the table, people who are marginalized or people who are even shy, just to like even pull them aside and be like, you can tell me your notes. You don't have to share the whole group, because especially when you first started cupping, and like, I know for myself, it was so intimidating when people are like, oh my gosh, this tastes like grape currant and this tastes like, praline. I was like, what is praline? I've never had praline before. And so going for my Q grader, I felt like finally I was legitimized to share my notes at the table, even though the Q isn't, I guess we'll talk about this in a second, but like the Q isn't a place for you to learn how to cup. But yet that's how I kind of took it. I was like, oh, I'm going to use my Q to show people that I have learned how to cup. And then my Q processor to show that I have learned how coffee processing works after living on a coffee farm and living in countries and visiting coffee farms for years. I wanted to finally have the respect that I thought I had earned from my work and knowledge, but I hadn't yet been receiving. Yeah.
A lot of our audience is interested in the Q certification, particularly, it might not surprise you, particularly Q grading. Mm-hmm. What would you, if you were starting today and you weren't already certified in Q grading, what would you do to prepare?
Cup. Just cup whatever you can. The Q grader it's a series of tests to test your skills at cupping, but also other sensories. So it's not a place to show up and be like, oh, will you teach me how to cup? It's more of a like, oh, I have this muscle memory of, I know that this flavor is, it has a citric acidity or whatnot. And I think the best way really to learn that is cup with intent or taste with intention. So when you're having new fruits or vegetables or breads or something, kind of like store that in your little muscle memory, be like, oh, this is my first time having a kumquat, and that's beautiful. And now I'm going to taste it in all the coffees today because I'm thinking about it. But then also just having those opportunities to cup, cupping with people who have more experience than you and being able to ask questions, and even cupping with people who don't, because I think one of the best ways to learn something is to teach it. So when I first was starting to work on my Q, I got a whole bunch of people that did not have their Q. And I was like, cup these with me. What do you get? Oh, well, I don't get that, but here's what I get. And just having those dialogues really helps install that into your brain. And a lot of cupping comes down to confidence. So I think that would be my big recommendation is taste with intention, cup as much as you can, cup with people.
Yeah. 100% on that last, well, on all of them, but on that last note in particular, I think you can learn so much from cupping with someone who has more cupping experience or different cupping experience. You can also learn a ton from someone who is maybe a thoughtful or not a thoughtful taster, who is far outside of coffee. They will experience coffee in a way that we might consider taboo or we want to ignore or avoid discussing, but it can be extremely insightful to understand some basic elements of coffee tasting that you've kind of forgotten about. Absolutely. But that your customers have not.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So I want to reveal what these coffees are now. So number one is Rancho Carmen. It's a mix of many varieties: Criollo, Caturra, Bourbon, Typica Mejorado. It's from about 30 small-scale farmers. It's a washed coffee, about 1,500 to 1,800 meters above sea level, from Chinchipe, Zamora, Ecuador. Gabby, this is the only coffee on this table not from you. This coffee was imported by Caravela. Coffee number two. By the way, all the details I'm saying are in the link under this movie picture here. Number two is Karindundu. It's a washed coffee mix of SL28, SL34, Batian, and Ruiru, from about 1,700 to 1,800 meters above sea level, from the Barichu Cooperative Society in Nyeri, Kenya. Again, this was imported for us by Red Fox Coffee Merchants. RFCM for life. Number three, Gabby, do you know what this coffee is?
I think I do.
Do you want to tell us about this coffee?
So this coffee is from a producer whose name is Guillermo Lomas. The varietal is Sidra. He lives in Pichincha, just north of Quito, the capital of Ecuador. This was our first year working with Guillermo, and Guillermo's great. But I can't remember what elevation he's at. Maybe you have that information, but I do believe Guillermo is watching today. So if he is, hola Guillermo. And yeah.
Very cool. It's about 1,350 meters above sea level. And this lot is Typica Mejorado also.
Sweet.
So it was a happy mistake that this coffee was third on the table. And I mean a happy mistake, because putting it between this and the final coffee, which is Gatamboya, a coffee of SL28 and SL34 wash coffee from Kenya, same cooperative society as Karindundu, Barichu, and also imported for us by Red Fox Coffee Merchants. They're having these three coffees like this, I thought created a very talking about context, created a very interesting context, and really went to show how much this coffee stood up with the notoriety of how Kenyas perform, especially on cupping tables.
Yeah. Well, I know when we first talked about this and you had said, how about Ecuador and Kenya? I was like, that may be the most unique cupping table I will ever be on. Not just because they're two different parts of the world who have usually quite different flavors, but also they're two of the most expensive regions that I know we work with. And so what a cool opportunity to get this fun mix. I love this layout.
Yeah, great. I'm glad that you're happy with it. We have, for all of you, we have availability of 2, 3, and 4, where we are all sold out of 1, but we do have some of 2, 3, and 4 left. So you can follow the links in the video to grab yourself a bag if that is something that you'd like to drink more of. So over the past about 55 minutes now, Gabby and I have been cupping. I hope that you have some questions. I'm going to bring Scott in here in a moment to share with us some of the comments or questions. and hope that we have an opportunity to answer some of them. Does that sound good to you, Gabby?
Absolutely.
Okay, bringing Scott in now. More of. So over the past about 50, he is clearly 20 seconds behind us.
Hi.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, Gabby.
How are you this morning, Scott?
I'm great. You did a great job.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like what you said about cup, because I always think the same thing. It's like, it's all about just practicing and cupping over and over, you know?
Yeah.
Are you
Scott,
guys?
Scott, did I do a good job too? Did I do a good job too?
You did a good job. Yeah. Yeah. But no, that went really well. And unfortunately, we don't have any questions so far for you. People have just asked some simple questions, made some comments about flavor. We've talked about that stuff. They have no really, you know, tough brain teasers for you guys or anything like that.
I have a question for Gabby.
Mm-hmm.
If we're waiting for more questions to come in, maybe everyone else is afraid that their question is a stupid question. And I promise, while there are stupid questions, your question's probably a good one. Gabby, let me make sure I phrase this grammatically correct. To whom would you recommend pursuing the Q certification?
Yeah. I think the Q certification, in my opinion, and may not always be the right opinion, it's kind of like a college diploma. You don't really need the diploma to get a job or do things, but it does surely help get you to certain jobs. And without that diploma, it's a lot harder, and you need to sometimes do a little bit more work to get into certain job levels. So I find the Q grader especially great for people who are looking into getting into like green buying, or maybe director of quality, into green coffee sales, maybe working at a lab in which they're going to be working a lot with cupping protocols. The nice thing about the Q grader is it really does, at least I found for myself, is like learning how to calibrate, or like knowing your calibrate on a larger scale. And so any job in which you find yourself needing to share notes and scores that are calibrated, I think it's a good thing for that.
So we have a question for Gabby.
Yes.
Patrick Snook says that he loves when you said intentional tasting. It's a great phrase. And he wants to know if early on in your career, you found it helpful to search for flavor notes that others claimed they could taste in coffee.
Yeah, absolutely. So for example, I would cup with people, and then I would ask for their cupping notes afterwards, and I would go over their notes and like go back to the coffees and cup them. And as we saw today, like Ryan and I have some different notes, but a lot of these notes are in the same kind of category of flavors. And so, you know, Ryan, for example, may have said grapefruit and I said Meyer lemon, but it's still like a citric, and it has that same acidity family going on. So just trying to get closer to those families, if you will, those flavor families, really, yeah, that helped me. And even with my going to like my local coffee shop, they have the flavor notes on the bottom of the bags, and roasters usually know what they're doing. So tasting coffee and being like, can I taste the brown butter in this cup that I'm drinking? It really helped me just to look for those notes and look past the coffee flavor.
Cool.
Yeah.
Gabby, Patrick's question underlines something that you discussed that put really well something that I've been noodling on, which is this idea of tasting muscle memory. I think some people have a negative reaction if you tell them what you're tasting, because they're like, now I'm definitely going to taste it because you put the thought in my head. But while that might seem like it's you're breaking the experience, in many ways that is the point of the experience. Is sometimes you taste something and it's hard to describe what it is, but you can almost be sure that if someone helps you get to that description, they'll be in a better position to describe it without assistance the next time. And that's like a huge part of like why all of this that we're doing right here is building that muscle memory and that collection of easily referenceable flavors when you're tasting something. And usually those do exist or reside in families of flavors.
Yeah, there's even this week, I was cupping with my coworker Joel, and I came across a cup, and I was like, "Can we talk through this?" And he said, "Of course." And I was like, "It's reminding me of that Italian candy, you know, the one that starts with a T." And I was like, "Torrone, I think." And he's like, "Is nougat the word you're looking for? Is it kind of like that malty nougat flavor?" I was like, "That is it. Thank you." And I like wrote down my notes and we moved on. But sometimes your muscle memory, at least for myself, it leads me to notes. And this is probably actually a really good thing to mention on this. Notes that aren't universal. So when I was in Colombia many years ago, I came across this one cup of coffee in Huila in which I thought tasted like an American candy. It was so sweet and so fruity, and there was so much acidity. And I was like, this is this one American candy that like any kid in America has, ate too much of. Everyone who I was cupping with was not from the US. A huge majority of them were from the UK, which this particular candy there's a candy in the UK with the exact same name as the candy I was talking about, but the candy in the UK is chocolate and caramel. So here I am talking about this like super sweet, fruity candy using its name when they're like, there's no chocolate, there's no caramel. This is like really fruity and sweet. And so for me, something I try to do is not use flavor notes that aren't universal. I try to become a little bit more broad because I don't know what people's experiences are. And maybe you've never had the candy from the United States. When I lived in Australia, I had a whole bunch of flavor notes thrown at me that I had never heard of. And so I would go to the grocery store and search for these fruits. And every once in a while, I'll say something even here today at Red Fox, and they'll be like, I don't know if I've had that, but can you describe it? And then that helps me go into what are other fruits or flavors similar to this thing that I have this muscle memory of or this experience of.
Yeah.
We have a question from a viewer. What, if any, is the difference between bitterness and astringency?
I'm not the best person to articulate that, to be honest.
So, and Scott, I know that you have something to say about this. Bitterness is a flavor perception. And I would have an easier time describing astringency than bitterness. Astringency is typically a dryness in the body or in the palate. I would more often describe astringency related to body and bitterness associated with flavor. Scott, what do you have to say about that?
Yeah, so bitterness is a taste that your tongue detects. I think we all kind of know it when we see it in a sense. But astringency is actually not a taste, it's a texture. And it's that texture of dryness that comes from certain compounds, such as tannins and various polyphenols that make your mucous membranes in your mouth contract. And that's what gives you that dry sensation. Now they often come together in coffee because, for instance, if you have a channel in an espresso shot or a brew, you'll get bitterness and astringency from the channel. But I think, astringency in cupping is usually coming from underdevelopment or sometimes from coffee from cherries that weren't fully ripe when they were picked. And there's a little bit of bitterness associated with that as well, because usually those coffees have excess chlorogenic acid, which is both bitter and astringent, So someone would like to know a little bit about Gabby's experiences in Ecuador. And I kind of would also, because I've never been there and it sounds like a very, exotic, exciting place. And there's a lot of surfing. So I want to hear about Ecuador.
First and foremost, I've never surfed in
Could you start with the surfing?
So Ecuador is a country in which I moved to when I was 16 years old. I lived there for 1 year, and I've been back to Ecuador about every other year since. It's always different time periods. I think once I went back for 3 days, and other time I stayed for a month. And I've seen the country change a lot, but it was the first time in my life that I experienced a really stark difference of coffee quality. So I was raised in the Seattle area, and like any good Seattleite, I started drinking coffee when I was 9 years old. So by the time, oh yeah, we can get into that later. But by the time I was 16, I was drinking cappuccinos most of the time. It wasn't quite in black coffee, but I could taste the difference between a cappuccino in the States and a cappuccino in Ecuador. And it wasn't good. So I ended up starting to put like flavor into my cappuccino because I just like couldn't drink it. And so I started asking around. It's like, don't they grow coffee here? Like, why is it so bad? And that's when I started figuring out.
I'm sure they love that.
Well, I started learning about export and import and how Ecuador at the time, I mean, this was 14 years ago, so it wasn't recent. Not that young. There wasn't any specialty coffee really being grown in Ecuador. And if there was, it definitely wasn't being kept in Ecuador. Mm-hmm. So what I was drinking was like a lot of commodity quality, very much under 80 point scoring coffee. And so when I came back to the States, I had this fire in me to like want to learn why is it that good coffee is always exported and bad coffee is kept in country? So that's when I started going to school for Latin American studies. I studied political economics to really understand. And every time my teacher was like, focus on something, I would be like, how about coffee? Like that's political and that's economic and that's in Latin America. And so, yeah, 7 years of college, I dropped out at one point, backpacked around Latin America for 11 months, visited tons of coffee producing areas. And I'm now stuck in it. I'm living in coffee profession for the rest of my life. But with Ecuador, when I went back in 2016, it was the first time I went to a specialty coffee farm. And the thing that I think stands out between Ecuador versus Colombia and Peru is one, the country's so small and it's quite affluent. Not everywhere, that's for sure, but amongst coffee producers, they tend to be a little bit more affluent than their neighbors. And they have these beautiful homes, they have these large hectares of coffee in which they're separating lots by varietal. And they only have to drive maybe 30 minutes to get to a mill. And so there's a lot of different factors which we don't see happening in Peru and Colombia. So as I've gone back in the last couple of years, just kind of diving a little bit more into that and like learning about these experimental varietals and like varietals that you don't see, such as Sidra, in other countries. But Ecuador has basically 2 seasons. It's wet and it's sunny. And like I was just talking to a producer last week, and what should have been a sunny summer for them, which would have been the December through March period, ended up being quite rainy. And how that affects Ecuador's coffee is very dramatic since they have only really these 2 seasons. So Ecuador coffee for me I find it to be so complex because you have every single producer is really, at this point, really doing lot separation and varietal separation. There's a lot of experimenting going on. Because the cost of coffee, there's buyers who are coming and kind of already able and willing to pay more. So when you find something that is special, like a geisha or an anaerobic process, which they want a little bit more money, it's okay. And usually we see those coffees move. So I hope that answers the question, but
Absolutely.
I fell in love with that country and it captured my heart.
Nice. Wonderful.
Yeah.
There is a question from Christoph. He says, when scoring individual aspects such as flavor or acidity, say on a form, what is your frame of reference? In other words, like what does it take to get, say, a 9 out of 10? So I guess question about context and such.
Yeah. I think this is something that I had to learn via experience, to be honest. I had to cup coffees and cup with people who had more experienced than I, and I would taste something, I was like, oh wow, this is really sweet, and they would say, yeah, that's really good sweetness, that's like a 9. And that's how I started to gauge mine. And I know that's not really helpful when we're not able to really cup side by side these days. But if there's like I think for the best way to describe it, it's like the clarity of the sweetness or the clarity of the acidity is usually what's going to help me score it a little bit higher, versus if it's not so clear, I'll score it just a little bit lower. And if I'm finding it to be like what I want to categorize as good, it's not great, it's not bad, it's good, that's usually my 8. If I can taste that sweetness and it's not too overwhelming, but it's not too, that's probably my 8. And I know it's going to be different for everybody because this is a subjective thing, but.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's what we're here for. We're here to get different perspectives and create, give people context and do this together so that it is, especially during this time, making up for our inability to do this together. So it's great.
Absolutely.
It's notable that when Gabby is cupping and when I'm cupping, and Scott, I'm pretty sure when you're cupping, we don't use one of these score sheets. Like when we're actually cupping.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if Gabby, when you're cupping, do you ever feel like, oh, I really should be using a score sheet to make sure that I get the right score here?
No. I don't. It helps when going back to like break it down, and especially when I'm talking to someone who's new to cupping, having that like the score sheet I have in my head. But at this point, I think I've cupped so many coffees this week alone, let alone in my life, that I can pretty much taste something and say, oh yeah, for me, this is an 85. This is an 87. Yeah. Without really thinking too much about why it's that. But when I go back, I can definitely break it down and say, this is why I'm scoring it this score.
So I've got a question for Gabby. This stems from our last cupping video, where Ryan and I briefly touched upon the role of body when buying coffee as a green buyer or as a roaster. Do you think body has ever been the determining factor of whether you would choose a coffee?
So when you guys talked about those, I paid a lot of attention to it because when it comes to Red Fox and myself when cupping, no. But when talking to roasters, I find it is for them, for some, not all. And as you know, there's so many different factors that can change body. So I do think as far as like my role in coffee, it's not something I need to touch on. But if you are in a purchasing decision and you are using the water you always are going to brew with in your cafe, and you're grinding it the way you like to grind coffee, and all of a sudden you get this really creamy body and you're like, oh, this is beautiful, or like more of a tea-like body, I think that's okay. But for my role in coffee, I tend to stay away. Yeah.
I have a feeling the more we discuss this, the more a lot of people will be like, yeah, it doesn't matter too much to me, because it's so easy to manipulate body by roasting or brewing or changing the type of paper filter you use or these other factors. And that's going to move the needle on body more than just whether you chose this lot of green or that lot of green typically. So
yeah, the flavors and like the cleanliness of the coffee is by far way more important.
Yeah.
Cleanliness and sweetness.
Body is the thing you score up when your other scores don't quite get your final to the.
Yeah.
Just kidding. That's overall.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, for me, it's always like, is it clean? Is it sweet? How's the complexity? Those are my top 3. And those are the 3 that I'm usually gonna like, when I email somebody, I'll be like, yes, this is a clean, sweet, complex coffee, but never the body.
Yeah. Cool.
I recently told Scott that in my 10 plus years of buying coffee, I've never decided to purchase or to not purchase a coffee based on the perception of body. And I feel very confident repeating that.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's
I don't want to make the discussion fuzzy, but I think also there's sometimes confusion between mouthfeel and body.
It's the least clearly understood thing. And it's not, I'm sure that they're described, sufficiently in all of the guidelines, but there's mouthfeel. Like we were just talking about astringency. Like, well, yeah, if a coffee is super astringent, I wouldn't buy it. Is that so? There's just there's things like that make it hard.
You made an interesting comment, Ryan, where you said that you related astringency to body, and there is a relationship to me anyway, in the sense that when I incidentally make a coffee astringent, let's say through channeling in a brew, it seems like the body evaporates. Like that astringency blocks your perception of body. Maybe it blocks body, I don't know, but I think it really just blocks perception of body. Now, my understanding from just doing a lot of reading from like, everything from like the Cupper's Handbook to the old books on coffee is that body is produced by insoluble particles, effectively fines floating in your coffee, which is why, say, a French press has a lot of body and say a Chemex has less. But mouthfeel is due to oils and other factors. So for instance, like Kenya is often described as buttery in mouthfeel. There seems to be an oil content in Kenya that's a little different than many other coffees. But let's say a Sumatra would be the opposite end of the spectrum, where there's, for some reason, there's a lot of body in Sumatra, but not quite the same mouthfeel. Would you agree? Would you concur? Is that your experience?
I think that's fair.
Yes. Only, like I use the Cup of Excellence cupping form as my blank sheet of paper. I'm just something I'm comfortable with. And, the word body is not written on it. It says mouthfeel. Mm-hmm. So I've never seen body and mouthfeel considered separately. I think what you're saying, Scott, and I agree, needs more discussion or research, is splitting the hair between, and maybe not splitting the hair, is clearly separating what we talk about when we talk about body versus mouthfeel.
Yep. I think I got those definitions and that idea from Ted Lincoln's Coffee Cupper's Handbook. It's been a while since I read it, but yeah. Anyway, well,
it's been a while since he wrote it.
We're at about an hour 15 minutes. Do you want to wrap up?
If there's any more questions, I feel ready to answer. I also, Gabby, I think I probably told you that you'd be done by now. So
you are my priority, Ryan. I am here until the end.
Down with us.
There have been no new questions in the last 10, 15 minutes. So.
Okay, great. Well, that's great. So yeah, just again, we have more of 2, 3, and 4. You can find more of the information about each of these coffees in the links below. And you can buy larger bags of 2, 3, and 4 in the links below. And yeah, this has been great. I'm always going to consider Facsimile in a beta state. So please keep sending your feedback, send your comments, send your hate mail, send an equal amount of love mail, because I have a weak, fragile emotional state. So just please send it all to us and help us continue to make this better. Gabby, I cannot thank you enough for making this time for us. It was just a delight and truly a treasure to cup with you today. I learned so much from cupping these with you.
Thanks, Brian. And I'll say, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me for questions about green coffee trading or what I do or cupping, please feel free to reach out. I'm happy to be another resource in the industry.
I also do recommend that you follow Gabby on Instagram at Gabby is Wright. That's like Gabby is correct. Gabby is Wright, but with a WRIGHT on Instagram.
Actually, Gab is Right.
Oh, it's Gab is Right. I'm sorry.
He's right. Yeah.
Gab is Right.
All of my coffee travel photos and a whole bunch of my random thoughts and definitely some cat photos.
Definitely a lot of cat photos. Perfect. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye, guys.
Thanks everybody for joining.